My name is Margaret, and I'm 68 years old. For 43 years, I woke up every morning with one purpose: taking care of my family. I packed lunches, worked double shifts, skipped vacations, and spent every extra dollar making sure my children had opportunities I never had. When my husband Robert died 12 years ago, I thought my children and I would become even closer. I was wrong. Today, I live in the same house I bought with my late husband, but somehow, I've become invisible inside my own home. My oldest son, Daniel, moved in with his wife Rebecca 3 years ago after temporary financial problems. Temporary turned into permanent. My daughter Lisa moved back 6 months later with her teenage son. At first, I was happy. I thought having everyone together again was a blessing. But slowly, things changed. Very slowly. So slowly that I almost didn't notice. Until one morning. I walked into the kitchen and heard Rebecca whispering to Lisa. "She's taking forever to die." I froze. For a second I thought I had misunderstood, but then Lisa laughed. "Once the house is ours, everything will be easier." I stood there with my coffee cup in my hand, feeling like my heart had stopped beating. Neither of them knew I was listening, and neither of them knew the truth. Because the biggest secret in this family had been hidden for more than 20 years. A secret my husband and I promised never to reveal until the right moment, and that moment was getting closer. Very close. If you're enjoying this story, don't forget to subscribe, because what happened next changed my family forever. My name is Margaret Wilson, and I am 68 years old. People often say that motherhood is the greatest blessing in life. For me, it was everything. I married my husband Robert when I was 22. We weren't rich. In fact, there were times when we barely had enough money to pay the bills. But Robert and I shared one dream. We wanted our children to have a better life than we ever had. So we sacrificed. Every single day. I worked as a nurse during the day and sometimes cleaned offices at night. Robert worked construction for almost 40 years. We missed vacations. We postponed our own dreams, and we gave everything to our children. Our son Daniel became an accountant. Our daughter Lisa graduated from college. The day each of them received their diplomas, Robert cried like a child. He looked at me and whispered, "We did it, Maggie. Those were the happiest years of my life. But happiness doesn't always stay forever. 12 years ago, cancer took my husband away from me. Before he died, he held my hand tightly and said, 'Promise me something.' I nodded through tears. Protect yourself even from the people you love. At the time, I didn't understand what he meant. Now I do." 3 years ago, Daniel called me. "Mom, Rebecca and I are having financial difficulties. Could we stay with you for a few months?" Of course, I said yes. He was my son. A mother doesn't abandon her child. A few months later, my daughter Lisa moved in too after her divorce. Soon, my peaceful home became crowded again. At first, I loved it. I cooked meals for everyone. I watched my grandson after school. I paid the utility bills. I cleaned the house. I did laundry. And somehow, without realizing it, I slowly became the servant in my own home. Rebecca never said thank you. Daniel barely talked to me. Lisa spent most of her time on her phone whenever the first sat down to rest. Someone needed something. "Mom, can you babysit?" "Mom, can you cook dinner?" "Mom, can you pick up groceries?" I never complained. Because mothers don't keep score. At least, that's what I believed. Then, everything changed one Tuesday morning. I woke up early and walked into the kitchen to make coffee. As I approached the doorway, I heard voices. Rebecca was speaking softly. "Honestly, I don't know how much longer I can deal with her." Lisa laughed. "Just be patient." Then Rebecca said something that made my blood run cold. "She's old. Eventually the house will be ours anyway." I froze. I couldn't move. For a moment I thought I had heard wrong, but then Daniel entered the kitchen, my own son, and instead of defending me, he said, "We just have to wait." "Wait?" "Wait for what?" "My death." Tears filled my eyes. I quietly returned to my bedroom and closed the door. For the first time in my life, I felt unwanted. like I was just an obstacle standing between them and something they desired, but what they didn't know, what none of them knew, was that 20 years earlier, Robert and I had made a decision. A decision that could change everything, a secret so important that we never told anyone, not even our children. And soon, that secret would finally come to light. That entire day, I couldn't stop thinking about what I had heard. For years, I had convinced myself that my children were simply stressed. Daniel worked long hours. Lisa was recovering from a painful divorce. Rebecca had always been a little cold. I made excuses for everyone. But that morning changed something inside me. For the first time, I stopped seeing them as children who needed help, and I started seeing them as adults making choices. Painful choices. That evening, I prepared dinner like always. Roast chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans. Daniel sat at the table looking at his phone. Lisa barely looked up. Rebecca tasted the food and frowned. "Margaret, this chicken is dry." "No, thank you. No appreciation. Just criticism." I smiled politely. "I'm sorry. I'll do better next time." Rebecca rolled her eyes. Daniel remained silent. That hurt me more than anything, not Rebecca's attitude, not Lisa's indifference, but my son's silence. The little boy who used to run into my arms after school now couldn't even defend me. After dinner, I quietly cleaned the dishes while everyone watched television. As I stood at the sink, I suddenly heard laughter coming from the living room. Rebecca was showing luxury vacation photos on her phone. "We should go to Hawaii next year," she said. Lisa smiled. "Once things settle down financially." Then Rebecca said something that made my stomach twist. "Maybe we won't have to worry about money much longer." The room became quiet. Then everyone laughed. Everyone, even my son. That night, I sat on my bed holding an old photograph of Robert. "Maybe you were right," I whispered. "Maybe I failed to see what was right in front of me." As tears rolled down my face, I remembered the promise we had made 20 years earlier. Back then, Robert had received unexpected news from an old business partner. Together, we made a decision. A decision so unusual that we agreed never to tell the children. "We'll tell them only when the time is right," Robert had said. At the time, I thought the secret would bring the family closer. Now I realize something else. Sometimes secrets don't protect wealth. Sometimes they reveal character. A week later, I accidentally overheard another conversation. This time, they weren't whispering. Daniel was speaking. "We should convince Mom to transfer the house while she's still healthy," Rebecca answered immediately. "Exactly. It'll save us legal complications later," Lisa added. "And honestly, she doesn't need this much space anymore." My heart shattered. They weren't waiting for my death. They were planning my future without me, without asking, without caring what I wanted. That night, Daniel knocked on my bedroom door. He smiled. The same smile I had trusted for 45 years. "Mom, we were thinking maybe it's time to make some arrangements." I looked at him quietly. "What kind of arrangements?" He sat beside me. "You know, estate planning, the house, paperwork, things like that." I stared into his eyes. For the first time in my life, I saw greed. Not love, not concern, greed. I simply smiled. "Don't worry, Daniel." His face relaxed. "Everything has already been taken care of." He smiled with relief. But he misunderstood my words. Completely. Because 20 years ago, Robert and I had already prepared everything. Every document, every instruction, every condition. And hidden inside those documents was the family secret nobody knew existed, a secret that would soon leave everyone speechless. Including my own children, the next few weeks felt different. Not because my family had changed, but because I had. For years I had ignored little things. The disrespect, the entitlement, the way everyone expected me to give without ever asking how I felt. But once your eyes are opened, you can never close them again. Suddenly, I noticed everything. Rebecca complained when dinner was 5 minutes late. Lisa treated my house like a hotel. Daniel only visited my room when he needed something. And every conversation somehow returned to money. One afternoon, I heard Rebecca arguing with Daniel in the hallway. "How much longer are we supposed to wait?" she whispered angrily. "I'm trying," Daniel answered. "Trying isn't enough. We need security." Security. That word stayed in my mind all day. Had I become nothing more than financial security to my own children? That evening, I climbed the stairs to the attic. I hadn't been there since Robert passed away. Dust covered the old boxes. Memories surrounded me. Christmas decorations. Photo albums. Robert's fishing equipment. And then I found it. A small wooden box. Exactly where he had left it. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside was an envelope. On the front, written in Robert's handwriting, were 5 simple words. For Margaret, when the time comes. Tears filled my eyes immediately. Even after 12 years, seeing his handwriting still made my heart ache. I carefully opened the envelope. Inside was a letter. My dearest Maggie, if you're reading this, then something has happened. Perhaps the children have changed. Perhaps life has become lonely. Or perhaps you're simply ready to know that I planned for this day. Remember what we promised each other. Never reward greed. Always reward love. Trust your instincts. And most importantly, do not feel guilty for protecting yourself. Love forever, Robert. Behind the letter was another document, a sealed instruction packet, the same packet we created 20 years earlier, the packet containing the family secret. I held it in my hands for several minutes, but I didn't open it. Not yet. Something inside me said, wait, the truth would reveal itself soon enough. And I was right, because only 3 days later, Daniel invited me to dinner. At first, I felt hopeful. Maybe he wanted to spend time with me. Maybe things could still change. But when I arrived at the restaurant, my heart sank. Daniel was there. Rebecca was there. Lisa was there. And sitting beside them was a man wearing a suit. Daniel smiled nervously. Mom, this is Mr. Harris. He's an estate attorney. An attorney, without telling me, without asking me. Mr. Harris extended his hand politely. Mrs. Wilson, your children are simply trying to help organize your assets. Assets. Not feelings. Not family. Assets. Rebecca leaned forward. We just think it's the responsible thing to do, Lisa added. Nobody lives forever, Mom. For a moment, the entire table became silent. I looked at my children. The same children I had carried, protected, sacrificed for, and suddenly I felt calm. Completely calm. I smiled, not because I was happy, but because I finally understood something. They had already made their choice, and now it was time for me to make mine. I reached into my purse, removed the old envelope Robert had left behind, and placed it gently on the table. Everyone stared at it. Daniel frowned. Mom, what's that? I looked directly into my son's eyes, and for the first time in many years I saw fear. I smiled softly. Something your father wanted you to see. And in that moment, nobody at the table had any idea that their entire future was about to change forever. The entire table fell silent. Daniel stared at the envelope. Rebecca's eyes immediately moved toward it with curiosity. Lisa crossed her arms. Mom, what is this? She asked. I gently placed my hand over the envelope. This, I said quietly, is something your father left behind. For a second, nobody spoke. Just hearing Robert's name made everyone uncomfortable, especially Daniel, because despite everything, he had loved his father deeply. Rebecca forced a smile. Well, if it's paperwork, Mr. Harris can review it for you. Mr. Harris nodded politely, but I shook my head. No. Everyone looked confused. This isn't for lawyers. Daniel frowned. Then what is it? I took a deep breath. 20 years ago, your father and I made a decision together. Rebecca leaned forward immediately. What kind of decision? I looked directly at her. The kind that reveals who truly loves family, and who only loves money. The room became quiet again. Mr. Harris shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Even he seemed to realize this conversation wasn't going the way anyone expected. I slowly removed Robert's letter and handed it to Daniel. His hands trembled slightly as he recognized his father's handwriting. He began reading silently. Halfway through the letter, tears appeared in his eyes. For a moment I saw the little boy I used to know, but Rebecca quickly interrupted. "What's the secret?" she asked impatiently. I ignored her. Daniel finished reading and lowered the paper. His voice was soft. "Dad wrote this." I nodded. "Every word." Then I reached inside the envelope again and pulled out another document, a much older document, one signed 20 years earlier. Lisa stared at it. Rebecca practically stopped breathing. Mr. Harris adjusted his glasses. "What exactly is that, Mrs. Wilson?" he asked. I smiled gently. "It's the reason your plans won't work." Daniel looked confused. "Mom, what are you talking about?" I took a sip of water. Then I finally revealed the truth. 20 years ago, your father sold his share in a small business. Daniel's eyes widened. "I never knew Dad owned a business, because we never told you." Lisa looked shocked. "Why?" "Because at the time, both of you were young, and your father believed money should never become the center of a family." Rebecca interrupted again. "How much money are we talking about?" There it was. Not concern, not surprise. Money, always money. I looked at her calmly. "Enough!" Her eyes grew larger. Daniel stared at me. "Mom, are you saying you and Dad were wealthy?" I smiled sadly. "No, Daniel. We weren't wealthy. We simply planned carefully." Then I looked at all three of them. "Your father and I created a trust 20 years ago." The table froze. Mr. Harris nearly dropped his pen. "A trust?" he repeated. I nodded. "Yes." "And it contains everything your father and I built together," Rebecca almost whispered. "The house, too." I smiled. "The house was never the most valuable thing we owned." Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. For years they believed this old house was my greatest asset, but they were wrong. Completely wrong. Daniel looked pale. "Mom, why didn't you ever tell us?" I looked into my son's eyes. "Because your father wanted to see whether his children would love their mother without knowing what she had." Silence. Pure silence. Then I said the words that changed everything. "And according to the trust agreement, no one receives anything automatically." Rebecca's face turned white. "What do you mean?" I folded my hands calmly. "Exactly what I said. There are conditions." Mr. Harris immediately asked. "What conditions?" I smiled. "The conditions your father personally wrote," Daniel whispered. "Dad wrote conditions." I nodded. "Yes." "And after everything that has happened recently." I paused. "I'm beginning to wonder if any of you have actually met them." For the first time that evening, Rebecca looked afraid. Lisa looked nervous. And my son looked completely lost. But none of them knew the worst part yet, because hidden inside those conditions was one final clause. A clause Robert had insisted upon. A clause so shocking that it could remove every single one of them from the trust forever. And I had not yet decided whether to reveal it. Not yet. Nobody spoke for several seconds. Rebecca was the first to break the silence. "What kind of conditions?" she asked nervously. I looked at her calmly. "The kind your father believed would protect this family." Daniel swallowed hard. "Mom, please just tell us." I slowly opened the folder again. Inside was another page. A page Robert had typed himself 20 years ago. Even after all these years, I could still hear his voice when I read his words. I cleared my throat. "To my children, money without character destroys families. Therefore, inheritance shall not be based on blood alone, but on love, respect, and integrity." The entire table remained silent. Then I continued. "Any beneficiary who attempts to pressure, manipulate, or mistreat Margaret Wilson shall immediately lose all rights to the trust." Rebecca's face lost all colour. Lisa stopped breathing for a second. Daniel stared at me in shock. "What?" he whispered. I nodded slowly. "Your father was very wise." Mr. Harris reached for the document carefully. After reading it himself, he looked genuinely stunned. "This clause is legally enforceable," he said quietly. Rebecca suddenly stood up. This is ridiculous. No one can judge people based on emotions. I looked directly at her. Your father-in-law disagreed. Daniel looked broken. Mom, I would never hurt you. For the first time that evening, tears filled his eyes. And suddenly, something inside me cracked too, because despite everything, he was still my son. I remembered his first bicycle, his graduation day, the nights I stayed awake when he had a fever. No mother stops loving her children, even when they break her heart. I took a deep breath. Daniel, loving someone and trusting someone are not always the same thing. Those words seemed to destroy him. Lisa lowered her head. Tears began running down her cheeks. I'm sorry, Mom, she whispered. I never realized how selfish I had become. For a moment I believed her, but Rebecca exploded. So that's it? She shouted. You're choosing money over family. I smiled sadly. No, Rebecca, you already made that choice. The restaurant became silent again. Even strangers at nearby tables had stopped talking. Daniel turned toward his wife. Please stop. But she refused. You've been waiting years for this inheritance, she screamed. And now this old woman wants to control everyone from the grave. Old woman. Those two words no longer hurt me, because for the first time in years, I wasn't afraid anymore. I slowly stood up, picked up my purse, and looked directly at Rebecca. This old woman fed you. This old woman gave you a home. This old woman treated you like a daughter. And this old woman deserves respect. Rebecca said nothing, because for once, she had no answer. I looked at Daniel. His shoulders were shaking. Mom, his voice broke. I failed you, and finally, after years of silence, my son cried. Not because of money, not because of the trust, but because he had finally seen himself clearly, and honestly, that hurt him more than losing any inheritance ever could. Before leaving, I placed one final document on the table. Daniel frowned. What is this? I smiled softly. The last clause. Everyone froze. Daniel slowly opened the page. His eyes widened immediately. Then tears rolled down his face. Because the final clause read, If my children return to kindness, humility, and genuine love, Margaret alone shall decide whether they deserve a second chance. Not the lawyers. Not the courts. Not money. Me. For the first time in decades, I held the power. And suddenly I realized something. The greatest revenge isn't destroying people. It's refusing to become like them. 3 months later, Rebecca moved out. Daniel started therapy. Lisa found her own apartment. And for the first time in years, my home became peaceful again. On Sunday afternoons, Daniel sometimes visits me alone. He brings flowers. We drink coffee. And little by little, we're rebuilding what greed almost destroyed. As for the trust, that secret remains between me and my lawyer. Because some lessons are more valuable than money, and some families deserve a second chance, but only if they earn it. As I often tell people now, growing old is not a weakness. And being kind does not mean being blind, because sometimes the quiet old woman everyone ignores is the one holding the family's biggest secret all along.